founders of the data warehousing industry right back to the mid-1980s. In fact, back then I worked for IBM and was one of the architects for the first data warehouse that was developed within Europe for internal use by IBM. After that, I did a lot of work with consulting and so on, but since 2008 I've been an independent consultant, and I'm currently based out of Cape Town, South Africa, but I operate around the world.
As one of the founding fathers of the data warehouse, do you still think there is a future for data warehousing, especially given the rise of big data technologies?
Oh, absolutely, and I'm not just saying that in order to preserve my baby. The data warehouse to me is and will continue to be a fundamental part of the data architecture and the information architecture of the business. And the real reason for that is because when I look at big data is this very sort of loosey-goosey sort of thing. It's data coming in from here and from there and from everywhere. It's got these different formats, it's got these different shapes, it comes in different qualities, it comes in all sorts of things. And for that particular reason, you have to be very careful about what you do with it. Now, the data warehouse architecture and approach, on the other hand, was very much about, putting things in a box and making sure that it worked well together and was well structured and was good quality and you knew what you were getting. So there's a role for both of those things, especially when you've got this huge, big amount of data that is quite unmanaged. You need something at the core in order to make it fit together, in order to be sure that you've got quality, in order that you make sure that it actually works. And that's where the data warehouse of the future, I think, will play the role. Now, that's a bit of a change from what most companies do with data warehouse today. So most companies today get into using the data warehouse as this repository for reports. And in that sense, the data warehouse of the future will not be a repository for reports, except for the ones that are particularly vital to be right. So the ones that you're going to give to the government, to the tax people, to the regulatory authorities, they need to be right because otherwise the CEO goes to jail, right? So in that case, you want that to be right and you want it to come from your qualified, consistent data warehouse. But the rest of the stuff which currently goes through the data warehouse in many companies, that can go through a different place.
Okay. What are the most important considerations organizations need to go over when making architecture and technology choices on their BI and big data environments?
Okay, well, there's many answers to that question, but maybe we can talk about two. Let's talk about technology. The technology issue and the technology architecture issue is a vital question. In the past, it didn't matter what the question was, but the answer was always, it's a relational database. And sometimes increasingly it was an Oracle database, but that's another debate. Today it's not true. So I've come up with a different picture. So the old architecture was a layered architecture. So you'd have your operational system layer, you'd have your staging area layer, you'd have your data warehouse, etc., etc. And the data had to flow through all these layers, which meant that there was a lot of work to do. It was quite, there was a lot of ETL to be doing. You get timing and issues around that. You get consistency, but you're trading off timeliness against consistency. In the new world, I think when we look at data coming from many different sources and many different structures, many different types, we really have to think about what I think of as a pillared architecture. And that pillared architecture is really, it's like turning the world on its side and looking at it from a different point of view. So I can think of three conceptual pillars. In the middle, I think about process-mediated data as the pillar where I make sure that the data that I'm providing is correct, is managed, is a record of the business of the company. And then I see two other pillars. I typically put those on the outside, one of which is a machine-generated data pillar. That pillar is really talking about the Internet of Things and all of that very fast data that comes from there. And on the other side, I think about the human-sourced information. human-sourced information, the social media stuff, the stuff coming from Twitter, the stuff coming from Facebook, all of that stuff is a much different type of data. So we see these three pillars, I see these three pillars with the ability to work across them. So that's my new hand-waving version of the architecture, which is explained in great detail in my book, Business on Intelligence. So that's one part of it. The second part of it is maybe around the organizational aspects. And when you think about information and making sure that information is correct, you really have to think about how do I get the organization into place around that. In the past, and it's not really worked very well, in the past data warehouse and BI have tended to be put into the IT organization. When you think about all of this new big data coming in, when you think about all of this new stuff that's really moving fast and the marketing people want to see it and the operations people want to see it, etc., you really have to think about organizationally making this a very key part of your organization. So I'm thinking, reporting direct through a business line to the CEO.
The current excitement around big data is similar to the excitement around business intelligence in its early days. Many companies still make decisions based on spreadsheets and basically their gut feeling. Do you think we will ever move to an era of data-driven decision making, and what's needed to get there?
Data-driven decision making is a phrase that at one level sounds great, and at another level sort of gives me a bit of creeps. So let me take both sides of it, because I'm an Irish guy and I like to see both sides of every story. So the first part is that certainly if you look at business today and you look at the way that business is run, 70-80% of the time it's run on spreadsheets. This is not really good. I mean, this is not information. This is not consistency. This is not quality. And in many ways, that's sort of where I say, if we could get to a data-driven business or a data-driven organization away from that sort of very uncomfortable place that we're in, that would be great. So there's definitely a role and an opportunity to be more data-driven in the broad sense of the phrase is used. But there's another side of this issue I think that we today in 2015 have to be careful about and be aware of, and that's where do we want to see people fitting in our organization. So I believe that people today, or people in old days in fact, their intuition and their gut feel is important. Otherwise we could replace them by machines, right? And increasingly, of course, we see a lot of interesting stuff coming out from the machine, from the deep learning and from the artificial intelligence, which is going through a renaissance on the last few years, where we can do things like, Google can allow us to find all of the cats on the internet, and that's always a really important thing to do. But there's also work going on in artificial intelligence, which is decision making, for example, in terms of enabling artificial intelligence programs to identify tumors in tissue samples actually more efficiently and more reliably than radiographers. So here we have a part of the human intuition and the human side of it being replaced by machines which are more efficient. So that's possibly in 5 years' time becomes a different answer than I give you today, but for the moment I think it's important to have, especially when you're talking about business decision making, the human intuition involved. And I like to see decision making as not just rational. I see decision making can be emotionally driven, it can be intuitively driven. There's a piece of us that is more than the rational side. And from that point of view, I think we have to bring both into the equation. So we have the data or the information, and I much prefer to use the word information than data. We have the information, which is a foundation. We have the information as a basis for some of this sort of more certain stuff, the more firm stuff, and we've got the human side, the intuition and the gut feel, which builds both on top of it and beside of it. So I like to use the phrase, rather than data-driven, to be information informed. And I think that gives a slightly softer feel to what it's about. And that's why I'd like to think that we could become information informed, which brings together the business, the people side of it and the data side of it.
Okay, thank you very much for this interview, and I'm looking forward to your session.
Thanks, George.